I'm Ruby, 32 female. I own a small but locally famous bakery called The Rolling Pin, a dream I built with my own two hands and a mountain of flour. I live in a small apartment above the shop, and my life revolves around the scent of baking bread and the satisfaction of a perfectly laminated croissant. For most of my life, my work was my sanctuary, a place where my value was measured in skill and dedication, unlike at home, where it was measured against my sister. This is the story of how my own family watched my heart literally stop, prioritized a tantrum over my life, and how that single moment of breathtaking neglect gave me the clarity to burn their world to the ground. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. To understand what happened on the day of the showcase, you have to understand the ecosystem of my family. It wasn't a family unit in the traditional sense, it was a solar system, and my younger sister, Sienna, was the sun. We all just orbited her, our paths dictated by the gravitational pull of her needs, her dramas, and her whims. My parents, Jessica and Connor, were her closest planets, basking in her reflected glory. I was Pluto, distant, cold, and mostly forgotten, unless my trajectory could somehow be useful to the main celestial body. Sienna was an interior designer, a profession that perfectly suited her obsession with aesthetics and surface-level beauty. She wasn't untalented, but her success was largely a product of my father's financial backing and my mother's relentless networking. Connor, a financial advisor, had set her up with a generous business loan that was, for all intents and purposes, a gift. Jessica, a former event planner, made sure Sienna was introduced to every wealthy, house-proud person in a 50-mile radius. Sienna's portfolio was glossy, her social media was impeccable, and her personality was a carefully curated facade of charm that crumbled under the slightest pressure. I, on the other hand, was the worker bee, the practical one. My passion for baking was seen as quaint, a cute little hobby that surprisingly turned into a real business. They never understood the 4 a.m. wake-up calls, the science of fermentation, or the artistry in a delicate sugar flour. To them, my bakery, the Rolling Pin, was just the place that provided free catering for Sienna's parties. I was the reliable, invisible daughter, the one who never asked for anything because I learned early on that asking only led to disappointment. While Sienna got a new car for her 21st birthday, I got a practical set of mixing bowls. While she was sent on a tour of Europe to find herself, I was working double shifts at a diner to save up for culinary school. The dynamic was cemented in our childhood. Sienna was the artist, the dancer, the one with flair. I was the quiet reader, the one who got good grades. Her achievements were celebrated with parties and praise, mine were met with a polite nod and an expectation that I'd continue to be no trouble. This wasn't malicious, not in an obvious way. It was a quieter, more insidious kind of neglect, the type that makes you feel like a ghost in your own home. You're there, but no one really sees you. They see through you, their gaze fixed on the brighter, more dazzling child. This dynamic came to a head with the Designer Showcase, a major local event where up-and-coming designers were given a space to create a concept room. It was Sienna's big chance to land a feature in a major design magazine. Naturally, the entire family's resources were mobilized. My father called in favors to get her the best placement in the venue. My mother worked her contact list to ensure every influential person in the city would be there. And I was asked, or rather, told, to cater the private viewing for Sienna's room. 40 of the most important potential clients and critics, and I was to provide an exquisite spread of pastries and savories. For free, of course. It was for family. "Ruby, this has to be perfect," my mother, Jessica, had told me over the phone, her voice tight with an anxiety she only ever displayed for Sienna's sake. "The food has to match the elegance of Sienna's design. Nothing too rustic. Think chic, minimalist, sophisticated." I spent 2 weeks planning the menu, testing recipes after my bakery had closed for the day. I designed a tiered display of macarons in a delicate amber, miniature lemon meringue tarts that looked like jewels, and savory chew pastries with a whipped goat cheese filling. It was a menu worthy of a Michelin star restaurant, all created in the precious hours I should have been sleeping. During this time, I'd been feeling off. An unusual fatigue had settled deep in my bones, and sometimes, if I stood up too quickly, a strange fluttering sensation LD race in my chest. I chalked it up to stress and overwork. At 32, you don't immediately jump to the worst-case scenario. You just assume you need more coffee and a good night's sleep. I remember mentioning the fluttering to my mother, who waved it off. "Oh, that's just anxiety, dear. We're all feeling the pressure for Sienna. Just take a deep breath." The day of the showcase was chaotic. Sienna was in a full-blown panic, not about the design, which was finished, but about a single wall. She had decided, at the 11th hour, that the custom-mixed greige paint was too cool. It needed to be a warmer tone. This crisis erupted precisely as I was trying to set up my delicate pastry display. The 40 guests were due to arrive in less than an hour. "I can't believe this," Sienna shrieked, her voice echoing in the large, open space. "This color is a disaster, it's clinical, it ruins everything." My father was on the phone, trying to find a painter who could come immediately. My mother was trying to soothe Sienna, stroking her arm and making cooing noises. "We'll fix it, sweetie. Don't you worry, your father will handle it." They were huddled together in the center of the room, a tight knot of panic and drama. I was on the periphery, carefully placing the last macaron on its tower. My chest was doing that fluttering thing again, only this time it was stronger, more insistent. A dull ache started to spread across my chest and down my left arm. I paused, leaning against the table for support. "Mom," I said, my voice a little breathless. "I'm not feeling well." Jessica glanced at me, her eyes clouded with irritation. "Ruby, not now. Can't you see your sister is having a meltdown?" "No, it's my chest," I managed to say. The pain was sharpening. It felt like a band tightening around my ribs. The room started to feel very warm and the edges of my vision began to blur. I looked at my family, a tableau of frantic concern, all of it directed at a wall of beige paint. They were 10 feet away from me, but they might as well have been on another planet. I was the ghost again, and this time I was fading completely. The fluttering in my chest was no longer a flutter. It was a frantic, chaotic drumming, a wild rhythm that had no beat. The ache in my arm had intensified, a searing pain that made me gasp. I gripped the edge of the crisp, white linen of the catering table, my knuckles turning white. The beautiful pastries, the product of weeks of sleepless nights, swam before my eyes. "Dad," I tried again, my voice weaker this time. "Something's really wrong." Connor was pacing back and forth, his phone pressed to his ear. "Look, I don't care what your schedule is, I'll pay you triple. I need a painter at the downtown exhibition hall in the next 20 minutes. This is an emergency." He shot me a look of pure annoyance, as if my interruption was the most inconvenient thing in the world. He turned his back to me, focusing entirely on the emergency of the paint. My mother, Jessica, was still trying to placate Sienna. "It's not that bad, sweetie. Maybe with the right lighting, it will look warmer." "It's horrible," Sienna wailed, throwing her hands up in the air. "It's the color of depression. My entire career is on the line because of this morgual beige." That's when it happened. The chaotic drumming in my chest suddenly stopped. There was a moment of profound, terrifying silence inside my own body. The pain didn't fade. It exploded into a crushing weight, as if an anvil had been dropped on my chest. My breath hitched. I couldn't draw in any air. My legs gave out from under me, and I collapsed. The sound of my body hitting the floor was a dull, heavy thud. It was loud enough to be heard, but it was just another sound in the cacophony of Sienna's manufactured crisis. My head hit the polished concrete floor, and the impact sent a sickening jolt through my skull. My eyes were open, staring up at the high industrial ceiling of the venue. I could see my family. They were still in their tight circle, their backs to me. They hadn't even turned around. I was conscious, trapped in a body that was no longer responding to me. I was dying, 10 feet away from my mother, my father, and my sister, and they were arguing about paint. The irony was so bitter it felt like acid in my throat. My entire life, I had been invisible to them. It seemed only fitting that my death would be, too. Panic, cold, and absolute tried to grip me, but I couldn't even hyperventilate. I could only lie there, watching as the world began to dim, the sounds of their voices fading into a distant buzz. Then, through the haze, another sound cut through. A woman's sharp gasp. "Oh my God, somebody call 911. It wasn't my mother's voice. It wasn't Sienna's. It was the event coordinator, a woman named Margaret, who had just walked in to check on the final preparations. Her face appeared above me, her eyes wide with horror. She was immediately on. Her phone, her voice calm and clear as she relayed the address and my condition. Another person, one of the venue staff, rushed to my side. Only then did my family turn around. I saw the moment their awareness shifted. The irritation on my mother's face melted into confusion, then a slow dawning horror. My father's jaw went slack, his phone clattering to the floor. Sienna just stared, her face a mask of disbelief, as if my medical emergency was a personal affront to her big day. "Ruby," my mother whispered, kneeling beside me, her hand hovering uselessly in the air as if she was afraid to touch me. "What's wrong? What happened?" I couldn't answer. I could only look at her, my eyes pleading for the comfort and care that should have been there minutes ago. The staff member who had run over was now starting chest compressions. He was talking to me, telling me to hang on, that help was on the way. His face was the last thing I saw before my world went completely black. I woke up to the steady, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and the sterile smell of a hospital. A nurse with kind eyes was checking my IV. "Welcome back," she said softly. "You gave us all quite a scare. You had a sudden cardiac arrest. It's a good thing someone started CPR right away. You're very lucky." Lucky, the word echoed in my silent room. I was lucky that a stranger had been competent. I was lucky that a stranger had cared enough to act. My family, I learned later, had been ushered into the waiting room, where they apparently fell apart. Jessica was hysterical, Connor was stone-faced with shock, and Sienna was complaining that the entire showcase was ruined. They came to see me a few hours later, their faces a mixture of guilt and self-pity. My mother burst into tears. "Oh, Ruby, we were so worried, we had no idea." "I tried to tell you," I whispered, my throat raw. "I said I wasn't feeling well." "We thought it was just stress, honey," my father said, his voice heavy. "With all the pressure on Sienna." He didn't even finish the sentence, but he didn't have to. The pressure on Sienna. That was the gravitational center of their world, the excuse for everything. Even for ignoring their other daughter as her heart gave out. Sienna stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, looking more annoyed than concerned. "Well, I'm glad you're okay," she said, her tone flat. "The magazine editor had to reschedule. It was a complete disaster." In that moment, lying in that hospital bed, something inside me shifted. It wasn't a snap, it was a slow, cold crystallization. The years of feeling like a ghost, of being overlooked and undervalued, coalesced into a single, hard point of clarity. These people were not my family. Family shows up. Family listens. Family, when you tell them your chest hurts, doesn't turn their back to argue about the color of a wall. My mother reached for my hand. "We'll take care of you, sweetie. You'll come stay with us when you're discharged." I pulled my hand away. The gesture was small, but it felt monumental. For the first time, I was pushing back. "No," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. "I don't think so." I looked past them at the blank wall of my hospital room and I saw a new future. It was a future without them in it. But first, there were things I needed to understand. Things about the bakery, about my father's help, about the fine print I had so trustingly signed years ago. "Could you all leave?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. "I need to rest, and I need to make a phone call." They looked stunned, but they shuffled out of the room. As soon as the door clicked shut, I reached for my phone on the bedside table. I didn't call a friend. I didn't call for a food delivery. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for a man I'd met at a business networking event months ago. A sharp, no-nonsense lawyer named Tobias. I pressed the call button. When he answered, my voice was steady. "Tobias," I said, "It's Ruby. I need to hire you. I think my family is trying to ruin me, and I need to find out how." The days following my cardiac arrest were a blur of medical tests, concerned doctors, and a terrifyingly long list of new medications. I was diagnosed with a rare genetic condition that caused electrical abnormalities in the heart. The doctors said the stress of the past few weeks likely triggered the event. I had a small device, an implantable cardioverter defibrillator, ICD, placed in my chest. It was a permanent, physical reminder of the day my heart stopped. A little guardian made of wire and silicone that would shock me back to life if it ever happened again. My family tried to visit. They brought flowers that smelled funereal and baskets of fruit I wasn't allowed to eat. Their attempts at concern felt hollow, like lines read from a script. Jessica would flutter around my bed, fluffing pillows, and talking about how they would redecorate my apartment to make it more restful. Connor would stand awkwardly by the door, talking about the stock market and how my medical bills were going to be quite something, as if scolding me for the inconvenience. Sienna came once, spent 10 minutes scrolling through her phone, and announced that she was too traumatized by the event to visit the hospital again. I kept the visits short, my responses clipped and polite. The cold clarity I'd felt in that hospital bed hadn't faded, it had hardened into resolve. During those long hours alone, I thought about my bakery. The rolling pin wasn't just my business, it was my identity. It was the only place I had ever felt truly seen. The thought of it being vulnerable, of it being tied to my family in any way, filled me with a dread that was colder than any medical fear. Tobias, the lawyer, agreed to meet with me in the hospital's quiet family lounge. He was 35, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of calm confidence that was exactly what I needed. He listened without interruption as I recounted not just the story of the showcase, but the entire history of my family's dynamic. I told him about the seed money for my bakery. "My father, Connor, helped me get the initial loan," I explained. "He said he was co-signing to help me get a better interest rate. He handled all the paperwork. I was 25, so grateful for the help that I just signed where he told me to." Tobias's expression didn't change, but he made a note on his legal pad. "And the business structure? Are you a sole proprietor, an LLC?" "An LLC," I said. Again, he set it all up. He said it was the best way to protect my personal assets. The irony of that statement now hung heavy in the air. "Ruby, I need you to authorize me to retrieve all documents related to the bakery's incorporation and the loan agreement from your father's office," he said. "Do you think he'll cooperate?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. "He'll see it as a responsible step. He loves the illusion of being a helpful, prudent father. He'll hand it all over with a smile." And he did. When I called my father and told him my lawyer needed to review my business documents for estate planning purposes in light of my health scare, he was thrilled. "An excellent idea, Ruby. Very proactive. I'll have my assistant courier the file over to his office immediately. See? You're finally learning to think like a real business owner." The condescension in his voice was so thick I could have choked on it. 2 days later, Tobias returned to the hospital. He walked into my room and shut the door quietly behind him. He wasn't carrying a thin file, he was carrying a thick, binder-sized portfolio. He sat down and placed it on the rolling table over my bed. His face was grim. "Ruby," he began, his voice low, "this is worse than we thought." He opened the binder. The first document was the loan agreement. My signature was there, clear as day. But it wasn't a standard bank loan that my father had co-signed. The loan was from a private investment company, an investment company that, after a quick search, Tobias had discovered was a shell corporation owned by one person, my father. "He didn't co-sign a loan, Ruby," Tobias said, his voice gentle but firm. "He was the loan. You've been paying him back with interest for the last 7 years." My blood ran cold. I thought of every check I'd written, every late night I'd worked to make sure that payment was never, ever late. I had been so proud of my financial independence, and all along, The money had been going straight into my father's pocket. But that wasn't the worst of it. Tobias flipped to the next section, the LLC incorporation documents. When you form an LLC, you have to list the members and their ownership percentage, he explained, pointing to a specific clause. You are listed as the managing member with a 49% stake in the business. 49%, I whispered, my voice trembling. It's my business, I built it. Who has the other 51? Tobias met my gaze, and in his eyes I saw a deep professional pity. He didn't have to say the name, I already knew. He turned the page. And there it was in black and white. The majority shareholder of the Rolling Pin, the bakery I had bled and sweat for, the one thing in the world that was mine, was Sienna. The document stated that in the event of my incapacitation or death, full operational control would transfer to the majority shareholder. A clause about incapacitation, written by my financial advisor father for his baker daughter who now had a serious heart condition. It wasn't just a contract. It was a vulture, circling, waiting for me to fall. They hadn't just neglected me. They had actively planned for my failure. My father had structured my dream so that he would profit from it and my sister would inherit it. The bakery wasn't my sanctuary. It was a gilded cage they had built around me, and I had been too trusting, too grateful to even notice the bars. I looked at Tobias, the legal documents blurring through the tears welling in my eyes. The shock was quickly being burned away by a white-hot rage, an anger so pure and clarifying it felt like a jolt from my own defibrillator. They had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness. They had mistaken my independence for loneliness. They thought they could take everything from me and I would just disappear. "What can we do?" I asked, my voice shaking but laced with steel. Tobias closed the binder. "The documents are ironclad. You signed them. Legally, they have you. A direct legal challenge would be costly and likely unsuccessful. They would paint you as ungrateful and confused after a medical trauma." My heart sank. For a moment, I felt the crushing weight of despair. "But," he continued, a slight predatory smile touching his lips, "that doesn't mean we can't get it back. It just means we don't fight them in a courtroom. We fight them in a boardroom. Your father is a numbers guy. Your sister is all about appearances. We're going to use that. We're going to hit them where they live, Ruby. Not with emotion, but with leverage." He leaned forward. "They wrote the rules of the game. We're just going to play it better than they ever imagined." I was discharged from the hospital a week later with strict orders to rest and avoid stress. The latter seemed like a cosmic joke. I moved back into my small apartment above the bakery, but for the first time, it didn't feel like home. It felt like a crime scene. Every piece of equipment, every bag of flour, felt tainted by my family's betrayal. Sienna was now the legal majority owner of my life's work. The thought was so violating that it made the surgical incision in my chest ache. My family, of course, was oblivious. They believed I was recuperating, fragile and grateful. They ramped up their performance of a caring family, calling daily and offering to bring over meals. Jessica even suggested that Sienna could help out at the bakery to lighten my load. "She has such a wonderful eye for design, Ruby," my mother chirped over the phone. "She could really elevate the look of the place. Maybe a new color for the walls." The call ended abruptly when I hung up on her. I was supposed to be resting, but I couldn't. With Tobias guiding me, I spent my days turning my apartment into a war room. He had been clear. A direct attack was futile. Our strategy had to be one of quiet intelligence gathering. We needed to find a weakness, a pressure point, something they valued more than the bakery that we could use as leverage. Our first target was the loan. Tobias had a forensic accountant, a quiet genius named Arthur, dissect the shell company my father, Connor, had used. On the surface, it was clean, but Arthur dug deeper. He analyzed the flow of money, my loan repayments going in, and then where that money went out. "It's a slush fund," Arthur concluded after a week of analysis, his voice flat over a conference call with me and Tobias. "He's using the profits from your interest payments, and probably from other investments, to fund your sister's lifestyle." The report he sent over was a sickening chronicle of my hard-earned money being funneled directly to Sienna's whims. There were payments to a high-end furniture supplier in Italy, a bill for a custom marble installation, and a series of large, unexplained cash transfers to Sienna's personal account right before her inspirational trip to Bali. I had been paying for the very life that my parents held up as a model of success, while I was counting every penny to make payroll. "Is it illegal?" I asked Tobias, my voice tight. "Shady, absolutely. Unethical, without a doubt. Illegal, borderline," Tobias admitted. "He's the owner of the corporation, so he can technically disperse the funds as he sees fit. It's morally bankrupt, but proving criminal intent would be tough. However, it gives us a motive and establishes a pattern of financial deception." This was a blow. I had hoped for a smoking gun, something that would put my father on the defensive, but Tobias was unfazed. "This is just one piece, Ruby. Now we look at Sienna." Sienna was all about image. Her interior design business, Sienna Interiors, was her entire identity. Her Instagram was a meticulously curated gallery of her work, her travels, and her fabulous social life. She projected an image of effortless success and high-end luxury. We needed to see what was behind the curtain. I knew one of my regular customers at the bakery, a woman named Chloe, worked as a freelance bookkeeper for several small businesses in town. Over a coffee, decaf for me, I carefully brought up Sienna's business, framing it as a proud older sister. "Sienna is doing so well, isn't she?" I said casually. "Her business seems to have exploded." Chloe took a sip of her latte and gave me a wry look. "She's certainly busy. Keeps me busy, anyway. That girl spends money faster than she makes it." It was a casual comment, but it was the crack in the facade I was looking for. With that little breadcrumb, Tobias knew where to look. He hired a private investigator, a discreet professional who specialized in financial background checks. What she uncovered was a masterpiece of financial mismanagement. Sienna was living far beyond her means. She leased a luxury SUV she couldn't afford, rented a chic downtown studio for her business that was double the market rate, and had outstanding debts with nearly a dozen high-end suppliers. She was robbing Peter to pay Paul, using the deposit from one client to pay off the angry vendor from a previous job. "She's a house of cards," Tobias said, reviewing the investigator's report. "The only things keeping her afloat are the regular cash infusions from your father's shell company and her ability to project an image of success to land the next client." And then we found the centerpiece. Sienna's big showcase project, the one that had nearly killed me, was not just a point of pride, it was a financial necessity. She had landed a major contract to design a new boutique hotel. It was the project that would make her career and, more importantly, solve her debt crisis. The contract, however, had a strict reputation clause. The hotel brand was extremely protective of its image, and any hint of financial instability, public scandal, or legal trouble associated with their primary designer would give them grounds to terminate the contract immediately. The pieces started to click into place. My father's financial games, my sister's precarious career, their desperation for the showcase to be a success, it was all connected. My bakery, the one they had so cleverly secured, was more than just an asset to them. With my fragile health, they probably saw it as their future safety net. They could sell it, or Sienna could run it into the ground, and it would be another source of cash to prop up her failing business. I felt a chill run down my spine. The coldness of their planning was breathtaking. They weren't just neglectful, they were predatory. "So we have our leverage," I said to Tobias, the plan starting to form in my mind, like a complex recipe I was finally understanding. "Sienna's career rests on a knife's edge. Her reputation is everything." "Exactly," Tobias said. "And we have a story to tell. The story of a beloved local business owner whose own family structured her company to seize it from her, all while using her money to fund a lavish lifestyle. Imagine how that story would play out in the local news. Imagine what that would do to the reputation of an up-and-coming designer who is supposed to be selling trust and good taste to wealthy clients. He leaned back in his chair. They think they hold all the cards because they have the ownership documents for your bakery. They're about to find out that you hold something far more valuable, the truth, and we're going to use it to get you your life back. For the first time since I woke up in that hospital, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't the warm, soft hope of reconciliation. It was a cold, sharp hope, the hope of a predator that has finally caught the scent of its prey. The board was set. The pieces were in place, and I was ready to make my move. The next 2 weeks were the quiet before the storm. I followed my doctor's orders, focusing on my physical recovery. I took walks, did my cardiac rehab exercises, and slowly my strength began to return. But mentally, I was anything but at rest. I was sharpening my knives. With Tobias's help, I was meticulously crafting our attack. It wasn't going to be an emotional outburst. It was going to be a surgical strike, executed with the precision of a master pastry chef. We had the leverage, Sienna's reputation, and her vital hotel contract. Now we needed the perfect delivery system. The first step was to create the illusion that I was weak and clueless. I started answering my family's calls again. I let my mother, Jessica, talk for hours about Sienna's triumph at the rescheduled showcase, which had apparently been a smashing success. I listened as my father, Connor, gave me unsolicited and deeply ironic advice on managing my business finances during my recovery. "You need to be smart, Ruby," he'd said, his voice dripping with paternalistic authority. "A business is an asset. You need to protect it, make sure it's in good hands in case anything happens." "You're right, Dad," I'd replied, my voice meek. "I've been thinking about that a lot. I feel so overwhelmed. I don't know what I'd do without you all." The bait was set. They swallowed it whole. Their calls became more frequent, their tone shifting from feigned concern to strategic positioning. They started talking about the future of the bakery as if it were already theirs to manage. Sienna mentioned she had found the perfect heritage gray paint for the front of the shop. My father suggested I hire a full-time manager to reduce my stress, and he had the perfect candidate, a distant cousin of his who was famously incompetent. They were moving their pieces into place, confident that the checkmate was inevitable. Meanwhile, Tobias was preparing the real attack. He drafted a series of documents. The first was a meticulously detailed summary of the forensic accountant's findings, tracing my loan payments from my business account directly into the slush fund and then out to pay for Sienna's expenses. It was presented not as an accusation, but as a dry, factual report, complete with account numbers and transaction dates. The second was the private investigator's report on Sienna's business, outlining her massive debts and her precarious financial situation. It painted a picture not of a rising star, but of a desperate woman on the verge of bankruptcy. The third and most powerful document was a draft of a lawsuit. It wasn't a suit we ever intended to file. Its purpose was pure psychological warfare. The lawsuit named my father and sister as defendants and alleged fraudulent inducement, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It recounted the entire story in cold legal language: the deceptive loan, the treacherous LLC agreement, and the showcase incident, framing their neglect not as an oversight, but as a contributing factor to the severity of my medical event. The lawsuit sought not only the return of my business, but also significant punitive damages. The final piece of the puzzle was a simple, one-page document that Tobias drafted. It was a membership interest transfer agreement. It would transfer Sienna's 51% ownership of the rolling pin back to me for the symbolic sum of $1. "We're going to give them a choice," Tobias explained as we sat in his office, the stack of papers on the desk between us. "It's what's known in negotiation as a non-offer offer. You present them with two options, one of which is so catastrophic that the other, while painful for them, becomes the only logical choice. Option A," he said, tapping the draft lawsuit. "This goes public. We file it. We send copies to the local business journal and to the CEO of the hotel group Sienna has her contract with. Her reputation is destroyed, her contract is terminated, and she is financially ruined. Your father's reputation as a trustworthy financial advisor is shattered. The family is engulfed in a public scandal from which they will never recover. He slid the single-page transfer agreement across the desk. Or, option B, they sign this. Sienna gives you back your company, your father forgives the remainder of his sham loan, and all of this, he gestured to the incriminating reports, disappears. No one ever has to know how close to the edge they were. They get to keep their secrets and their reputation, but they lose the prize. The plan was brilliant. It was ruthless. It was perfect. It didn't rely on appealing to their love or their conscience, because they had neither. It appealed to the only thing they truly cared about, their own self-interest and their precious public image. The stage was set for what Tobias called the final tasting. I called my parents and sister and invited them to my apartment for a family meeting. "I need your advice," I said on the phone, injecting a note of pathetic vulnerability into my voice. "The doctors have said I need to make some permanent changes to my lifestyle. I'm not sure I can run the bakery on my own anymore. We need to discuss its future." They were practically salivating. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment the ghost would finally give up the ghost and hand over the keys to the kingdom. They agreed to come over that Sunday evening. "We'll be there, sweetie," my mother said. "Don't you worry about a thing, we'll figure it all out." As I hung up the phone, my heart was beating a steady, strong rhythm. The little device in my chest was silent. I didn't need it. My heart was filled with something more powerful than any electric current, the cold, energizing power of imminent justice. I spent the rest of the day not baking, but tidying my war room, arranging the documents in 4 neat piles on my dining room table. One for me, and one for each of my soon-to-be former family members. The final tasting was about to begin, and I had a feeling they were not going to like the taste of what I was serving. They arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, a united front of predatory sympathy. My mother, Jessica, carried a bouquet of lilies, their scent thick and cloying in my small apartment. My father, Connor, had a bottle of expensive wine, which I was forbidden to drink. Sienna trailed behind them, already looking around my apartment with a critical eye, as if measuring for new curtains. "Oh, Ruby, you look so pale," Jessica cooed, rushing forward to give me a hug I did not return. "You really shouldn't be on your feet." "I'm fine, Mom," I said, stepping back and gesturing towards the dining table. "Please, have a seat, I've laid everything out." They saw the folders arranged neatly on the table and exchanged small, triumphant smiles. They thought these were simple business ledgers, the prelude to my formal surrender. Connor, taking the head of the table as was his custom, adopted a grave, serious expression. "All right, Ruby," he said. "Your mother told me you wanted to talk about the future of the business. It's a wise decision. Your health has to be the top priority now. We've actually been talking, and we have some ideas." "I'm sure you do," I interrupted, my voice calm and even. The shift in my tone, the lack of my usual deference made them pause. I remained standing. "But before you share your ideas, I have some information I need to share with you." I walked around the table and placed a folder in front of each of them. "Please," I said, "open them." My mother opened hers with a confused frown. My father's expression was one of paternal annoyance, as if I were a child making a clumsy presentation. Sienna just sighed dramatically and flipped her folder open with a flick of her wrist. Silence descended on the room. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, punctuated only by the rustle of paper. I watched their faces. It was like watching the seasons change in a matter of seconds. Jessica's confusion turned to disbelief. Her hand went to her mouth as she stared at the bank statements from the slush fund, the ones showing my money paying for Sienna's designer handbags. Sienna's boredom evaporated into stark panic. Her eyes darted over the investigator's report detailing her mountain of debt. I saw her breath catch when she got to the part about the reputation clause in her hotel contract. But the most satisfying transformation was my father's. Connor's mask of wise authority crumbled into a pasty, gray shock. He read the draft of the lawsuit, his face slackening with every paragraph. He, the master of fine print and legal loopholes, was seeing his own tactics turned against him with devastating precision. He saw his name, his reputation, his entire professional identity dragged through the mud. The color drained from his face. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a horror that was, for the first time, not about his golden child, but about himself. "What is this?" he finally whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "Ruby, what have you done?" "I've done my research," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. "Something I should have done 7 years ago when you had me sign my life's work away." "This is insane," Sienna suddenly shrieked, slamming her folder shut. "You're delusional, you can't prove any of this. Dad, tell her." "It's all provable, Sienna," I said calmly. "Every transaction is documented. Every debt is confirmed. It's a very neat little package of facts. I imagine the business editor at the City Herald would find it fascinating. Or perhaps the board of the St. Regis Hotel Group." Sienna's face went white. She knew I was right. Jessica started to cry, her sobs thin and performative. "Ruby, how could you, after all we've done for you? We were only trying to protect you." "Protect me?" I let out a laugh, a sound devoid of any humor. "You were protecting yourselves. You built a safety net for your reckless, financially incompetent favorite daughter, and you used my dream as the thread. You saw my health scare not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. The day my heart stopped, you were 10 feet away, and you didn't even turn around. Don't you dare talk to me about protection." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment longer before I moved to the final phase of my plan. I walked to the sideboard and picked up the single sheet of paper and a pen. I placed them on the table in front of Sienna. "But I'm a reasonable person," I said, my voice softening into a dangerously gentle tone. "I don't actually want to destroy this family. I just want it out of my life. So I'm going to make you a counteroffer." I explained the 2 options Tobias had laid out for me. Option A, I file the lawsuit. I send the packages to the press and the hotel. Their world burns. Option B, Sienna signs the paper in front of her, transferring 100% of her shares in the rolling pin back to me. Connor signs a document, which my lawyer will deliver tomorrow, forgiving the entirety of the outstanding loan. And in return, all of this documentation gets locked in a safe, and I walk away from them forever. "You will never contact me again," I stated. "Not for holidays, not for birthdays, not for emergencies. We will be strangers. You get to keep your reputations and your secrets, and I get my life back." Connor looked like he had been punched. This was his game: leverage, threats, unbreakable contracts, and he had been beaten at it by the daughter he had never taken seriously. He knew he had no move. I had him in checkmate. Sienna looked at my father, her eyes pleading. "Dad, you can't let her do this." Connor didn't look at her. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the last thing I ever expected to see, a flicker of respect. The respect a predator gives to another, more successful predator. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. With a trembling hand, Sienna picked up the pen. Her face was a twisted mask of rage and humiliation. She scribbled her name on the signature line, the pen digging so hard into the paper it almost tore through. She threw the pen down on the table. "There," she spat. "Are you happy now? You've destroyed our family." I picked up the signed agreement, my hands perfectly steady. I folded it neatly and tucked it into my pocket. "No, Sienna," I said, looking at the 3 of them for the last time. "I didn't destroy this family. It was rotten from the start. I just finally decided to stop breathing in the rot." I walked to the door of my apartment and held it open. "The tasting is over. Please leave." They rose, defeated and silent, and filed out of my apartment, out of my bakery, and out of my life. As I closed the door behind them, I didn't feel triumph or joy. I felt a profound and cleansing quiet. The ghost had finally found her voice, and the silence that followed was the sound of her finally being free. The days after the final tasting were strangely quiet. My father's lawyer couriered over the loan forgiveness documents the very next morning, as promised. Tobias handled the official filing of the LLC ownership transfer. Within a week, it was done. The rolling pin was mine, 100%, legally, financially, and spiritually. My family kept their end of the bargain as well. There were no calls, no texts, no attempts at contact. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and I had simply ceased to exist for them, which was the greatest gift they had ever given me. The silence they left behind was vast, but it wasn't empty. For my entire life, their presence had been a constant low-level hum of anxiety and expectation in the background. With that noise gone, I could finally hear my own thoughts, my own desires, my own heartbeat, steady and strong. The first thing I did was close the bakery for a week. I put a sign on the door that said, "Closed for renovations and a much-needed rest." I didn't renovate, not really. Instead, I deep-cleaned every inch of the space myself. It was a methodical, physical process of reclaiming my territory. I scrubbed floors, polished stainless steel until it gleamed, and wiped away every metaphorical fingerprint they had left on my world. I threw out the lilies Jessica had brought. Their funereal scent was finally gone. During that week, I also made an appointment with a cardiologist who specialized in my condition. I wanted to understand my new reality not through the lens of fear or fragility, the way my family had seen it, but through a lens of knowledge and strength. The doctor was wonderful. She explained the ICD not as a sign of weakness, but as a technological safety net. "Your heart is strong, Ruby," she said. "This is just its insurance policy. Now go Lee. V your life." And so I did. When I reopened the rolling pin, something was different. I changed the menu, adding recipes I had always wanted to try but had deemed too rustic or simple for the sophisticated brand my mother thought I should project. I brought back my grandmother's chunky apple cinnamon scones and a hearty, dark rye bread. I baked for joy, not for approval, and my customers loved it. The bakery was busier than ever, filled with the warmth of genuine appreciation. I also made a change to the business itself. I started a profit-sharing program for my 2 long-term employees who had been with me from the beginning. I wanted my success to be their success, too. I was building a new kind of family, one founded on mutual respect and shared effort. About 6 months later, I heard through the town grapevine what had become of my old family. Sienna had managed to keep her hotel contract, but just barely. Without the constant cash flow from my father's slush fund, she was struggling. Her business was still a house of cards, and now the wind was blowing. My father, Connor, had apparently taken a significant hit to his reputation. A few of his clients, it seemed, had heard whispers and pulled their accounts. He was a man who had built his career on the image of shrewd, reliable wisdom, and the tarnish was hard to polish away. My mother, Jessica, was reportedly beside herself, her perfect family image shattered beyond repair. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, no anger. It was like reading about strangers in a newspaper. Their orbit was no longer connected to mine. Their sun could collapse into a black hole for all I cared. I was in a different galaxy now. My lawyer, Tobias, became a good friend. We met for coffee regularly. It was during one of those coffees that he asked me a question that brought everything full circle. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "The way you did it, the ruthlessness." I thought for a moment, stirring my decaf latte. I thought about the girl who collapsed on the floor, unheard and unseen. I thought about the woman who woke up in a hospital bed, realizing she was utterly alone. "No," I said, and my voice was clear and certain. "I don't regret the ruthlessness. I regret the years I spent being quiet. I regret thinking that if I just worked hard enough and caused no trouble, they would eventually see me. The ruthlessness wasn't the poison, Tobias. It was the antidote." That evening, I was cashing out the register at the bakery. It had been a long, good day. I was tired, but it was a satisfying, bone-deep weariness that came from purposeful work. As I locked the front door, I looked at my reflection in the glass. I saw a woman who was no longer a ghost. I saw a baker, a business owner, a survivor. My life wasn't a glossy magazine feature like Sienna's. It was simpler. It was the smell of yeast, the warmth of the ovens, the quiet satisfaction of a balanced ledger, and the steady, reliable beat of my own mended heart. I had started from scratch with a new recipe for my life, and for the first time it was all mine, and it was delicious.